Welcome to the Shiloh Museum of Ozark History's podcast series. This podcast features local historian Abby Burnett in a program on tombstone symbolism. The program was recorded February 22nd, 2014.
I'm going to show you pictures from some of my favorite stones, favorite cemeteries, talking about symbols, mostly about what symbols don't mean, because so many of the books out there that will tell you what something means probably were written about New England slates or someone's taking a guess. And when you see a stone that clearly is, let's say, a stone where the book says the symbol means matrimony and it's on a 3-year-old's grave, you can probably figure that the book has got it wrong. So first of all, a symbol on a tombstone is speaking a language. And when people combine symbols, they're actually telling they're expressing a very complicated thought or idea. A symbol being a simple picture that stands in for a very complicated thought. So, for example, if you see a bird on someone's stone, it's not meant to be taken literally. It's not that they like birds or had pigeons or ate a lot of chicken. It's the soul in flight, the soul on its way to heaven, or it's taking the soul to heaven. So everything had a deeper meaning, and 100 plus years ago, everybody knew what those meanings were. This little stone, and it is small, it's a little bigger than a book, front and back, was found up in a Missouri cemetery, and it's a carver's sample. And this carver, presumably in Eureka Springs, sent this out with all of the most popular symbols of the day. So somebody wanting to order would tell him what one they wanted with the person's name and dates. So clearly he's loaded this up with the most popular things at the end of the 1800s. Eureka being founded in 1880, so this was probably made 1890 to 1900. A lot of these symbols stopped being popular in the 1900s. So these being the most popular, the one on the left, God's downward hand. Some books will say it's pointing towards hell. Actually, it's pointing toward the person's name, dates, virtues, or it's pointing to another symbol for emphasis. The hand of God is mentioned throughout the Bible, so it's an important symbol. Clasping hands, some books say this is the welcoming of the soul to heaven. Well, in Arkansas, in the South at least, the hand on the left will have stiff fingers. That's the dead hand. The hand on the right is clasping. And it's really the farewell between the living and the dead. And we know this because a lot of times these clasping hands will have a little banner over them, and they'll say things like, "We will meet again," "Sad farewell," "Gone home," "Our loved one." So they're not in heaven yet. This is, the stiff fingers is the dead side. And that's, my friend Bill Flanagan told me this. He noticed this in Evergreen. And then later I read an article by Gravestone Studies talking about this in Canada, and made the same conclusion. Some books say it represents matrimony. Again, I found this on children's graves, so highly unlikely. Down at the bottom, the Masonic compass and square on top of a Bible. You could have just the Bible by itself. The Masons used the Bible in their symbolism. On the right, the dove is flying upwards towards heaven, and it has a bud in its beak. The bud is the baby, the little life that didn't get to bloom on on earth, budded on earth to bloom in heaven. Sometimes it's just a dove flying upward, but if it has a bud, that's going to be a baby's. That's going to represent a child. The words Eureka Springs tell you where to find the carver, but they're also raised letters, which he's showing off a little here. Raised letters are harder to do. One tap of the mallet and you've just turned an R into a P. So the hand holding the rose, an open rose is a fully lived life. You could put a rose on a baby's grave with a bud, and that would be the rose would be the child in heaven. But for the most part, rose and bud are mother and child, and a fully open rose is a fully lived life. That's an adult symbol. And down at the bottom, the lamb, not just for children. Lamb is a Christian symbol. Jesus is the shepherd. We are his flock. A lamb is appropriate for an elderly person, a baby, a boy, a girl, for anybody. So that's a quick overview of the most popular symbols of the late 1800s. What do we do today? I don't think you could argue that these are symbols, a small picture expressing a complex thought. If it were a symbol, then this here would have to be the golden reward of the well-lived life in heaven. And I'm tap dancing pretty hard here because that's an Oscar statuette, and that was for David Brown, Helen Gurley Brown's husband, buried at Osage, and he won an Oscar. I have found more than one Coke bottle. I have found more than one motorcycle. I have found many, many razorback pigs on smiley faces, professions. So these really aren't symbols. These are things that have to do with the deceased, but we're not using symbols in the same way. Where we do use symbols are to represent matrimony. And these are just a few examples. Normally the linked wedding rings or 2 wedding bells or 2 doves. But for somebody, a plain and peanut M&M were how they wanted to express marriage. I don't know why somebody put boxing gloves, but they did look at this. There's an engagement ring in the palm of one glove. I first saw this and thought, well, they fought a lot, but now I'm not so sure. Mule shoes, somebody carving on a tree. There are lots of ways that families choose their own symbol, and then they put their marriage date. Other than, say, an RV and the words gone home or new highways as a type of symbol, really we don't use symbols in the same way people used to. So what I want to do now is I want to go through an alphabet of symbols, and I want to show you what was being used on stones mostly in the Arkansas Ozarks, and what these really mean, because again, it's easy to misinterpret. I don't know if you can see this, but this woman, and she's on a grave in the Russellville Cemetery, there's an anchor leaning up against her side. Her hand is resting on it, and it's kind of hidden in the folds of her gown. It's very hard to get a photo that shows what it looks like, but she's got this massive anchor, and you think, well, what does this mean? Some books will say it means the person was a member of the Navy, which would be a surprise to some of the small children, little girls, old women that have anchors on their stones. The point of the anchor is that there were 7 deadly sins and there were 7 heavenly virtues. This is in classical literature. And the cardinal virtues were temperance, prudence, fortitude, and justice. And the 3 theological virtues are faith, hope, and charity. Every one of these virtues has a symbol that is associated with it. And the symbol for hope is the anchor. And if you think about life's journey being like the passage across an ocean, you don't drop anchor when you're in the middle of the ocean. You drop anchor when you're in harbor, and harbor is heaven. So the anchor is the hope that the deceased is in heaven, has safely reached the other side. There is an epitaph that's quite popular, anchored safe where storms are over. And when you put an anchor on the stone, it's the belief, the hope that the soul is in heaven. Now what's nice is that a lot of times the anchor has broken loose of its moorings. This has got a trailing rope, and it's actually a frayed rope where it's broken away. I don't know, is that the soul having broken free from earthly existence? Having an anchor float over some gates of heaven, that has the gate, we're going to talk about the gates in a little bit. Anchors are often at an angle because you wouldn't want to drop one straight down, you want it to catch. And then down here, there's a dove sitting on top of an anchor. The dove being the soul is safely in heaven, or we hope that the soul is safely in heaven. Anchors are lovely in the way they tend to lurk. They get hidden inside of other symbols. Carvers like to layer symbols and use them in combinations. So here we have the gates ajar again, and a dove and at rest, etc. But up in the corners, there's our friend the anchor. This stone here has a great big chain carved across the front, and then down the side is an anchor. This was in Mount Holly, God's descending hand pointing out something important, and the anchor is on top of the Bible. So there's the Christian faith being anchored, let's say. It's for a child. And this anchor just has a ring. It doesn't have the rope attached to it. Sometimes they'll say, well, an anchor means a person's a member of the Navy. Well, these are anchors or symbols of somebody who's in the Navy. For example, this one here has got USN at the top. So it looks like the anchor with a broken rope, but it is clearly pointing out that this is naval. And this man here is still alive, chose an anchor, but he's got U.S. Navy on it. So there really isn't a conflict there. But it's not. The point is that not all anchors mean the person was in the Navy. Going on with our alphabet of symbols, A is for angel. This one is pretty self-explanatory, given that, well, it's an angel, but angels have lots of functions in a cemetery. They don't always mean the same thing. In the case of a child or a cherub, it's almost always on a child's grave. The one on the right, however, is on a man, Mr. Garner, who had a very illustrious life, and that is a recording angel. It's holding the book of life or the book of deeds in one hand, saying this man lived a good life and pointing upward, so his deeds have ensured that he is going to go to heaven. We have weeping angels, mourning angels. This is also in Little Rock, but that same grieving angel is found in St. Louis. It's found in Italy. It's been copied a lot. That's the family's expression of loss and mourning. And then the angel that takes the deceased to heaven. This is very rare. This would be an amazing stone anywhere, but this is in Little Rock, and this is Mary Watkins. Mary Watkins died in 1878. She was an orphan. She'd been adopted by a wealthy doctor and his wife. And when she died, they had a conventional box tomb put on her grave. And I would guess this was carved in Italy because it took 2 years to get it to Little Rock. And that, I believe, is a portrait of Mary done from life. But she's dead. Her hands are clasped on her chest. That's the posture of somebody that's been laid out. And the angel is pulling her up out of the grave and pointing towards heaven, showing her where she's going. And her epitaph says, "Why seek ye the living among the dead? She is not here, but is risen." So we're watching that happen. Generally, though, when you see angels in the Arkansas Ozarks, you're going to find bas-relief carvings. They're going to be small. They're kind of whatever a carver wants to do. This one here, that angel's holding the bud. That's a baby's grave again, and is taking the soul to heaven. And then this, back to Mount Holly again in Little Rock, this family lost 4 children. So they had them represented as 4 little angels. This stone is so weathered, they look kind of like 4 little fireflies at this point, but they are 3 children who were named, and the last was an infant. Going on with the alphabet, B is for baby. I do not know why Victorian-era parents found a child on a child's grave so comforting. To modern sensibilities, it's a little creepy. And this one is not in the Ozarks, this is in White County. But apparently, I think it goes back to the line in the Bible, not dead but sleepeth. So you put a sleeping child on your child's grave, and that was considered comforting. They almost always have a shell or some kind of a backdrop, not always. The shell represents baptism, whether that was intended or not, I don't know. But it makes a nice backdrop for the child, and the child always has its eyes closed. B is for butterfly. I've been reading books on symbolism for a long time and reading about how the butterfly was this perfect mortality symbol, and I never found one in Arkansas. And then one day I was strolling through Eureka Springs, Oddfellows Cemetery, town cemetery, and I saw this. The light was just perfect, and it lit this up. And and later a caretaker told me that there are 2 of them. There's another one I haven't found. The butterfly is a really perfect mortality symbol because you think of the 3 stages of a butterfly's life. First comes the caterpillar, and that's us. We're all a bunch of little grubs, and that's the human existence. Nothing much to look at. But then the butterfly goes into the chrysalis, or the cocoon. And that's here, right here. They carved it. There's the cocoon, and that would be death, the sepulcher. And the other side of that, of course, is the fully emerged butterfly. And in case anybody missed the point, the carver put the word flown up at the top. And that would be the soul. It's winging its way upward. It's beautiful. It's what we will all become in the next world. This is a child's grave. I don't see a caterpillar anywhere in this carving. I wish there had been one. Closed buds, again, the flower that doesn't get to bloom on this plane of existence. We see a lot of butterflies on modern markers. People can have them lasered on, but this is the only one I know of on an older stone. And this is 1881, so Eureka hadn't been in existence for very long. C is for column, or more specifically, broken columns. The broken column, and clearly these were carved to look broken. These were not vandalized. The broken column symbolizes the life cut short, and it's appropriate for a baby or somebody that lives to their 90s. It just means that life was broken off, was halted, and it can be an obelisk or it can be a column, and it can have the top still there or the top can be missing. This one over here is in Eureka Springs, and there are 3 in all, 2 3-dimensional carvings and then 1 bas-relief. Here are some other examples. The one on the left is a massive column for a man who lived a very long life, and the one on the right is for children. This is over in Hot Springs. The Lilo, Wharton, and Rosebud Rector. And in Mount Holly, there are 4 columns for 4 children, and each column represents a different child. So the shortest column would be the youngest child. Probably carved in Memphis. I think the one in Mount Holly is signed. The children have got garlands, and each one is a different type of flower. So roses, daisies, lilies. But I've had people insist that a broken column is a vandalized stone, and while certainly stones get vandalized, that is not what's going on here. F is for flowers, and I don't have time to go into what they all mean, not that I know what they all mean, because the Victorians used something called the language of flowers, where each flower had a certain meaning, and when you used them in combination, you could send a message. There's actually a movie about time travel where a guy comes back to this era, and he's appalled when he sees a modern man give yellow roses to his girlfriend. He says, "Don't you know yellow means I despise you? You can't give that to a woman." So a woman at one time would know what a man was intending by the flowers and the colors, supposedly. Tombstones, I think they're a little more obvious in that you have forget-me-nots, you have morning glories, which bloom and die very quickly. That would be the brevity of life. Open roses. I don't know what a chrysanthemum, if that is a chrysanthemum, what that means. But in any event, somebody did a really nice job. And these bouquets of flowers show up. But mostly what you're going to find will be roses and lilies. They're the two most common. On the left, a child's broken bud. The bud is not going to bloom in this world. On the right, an adult life, fully opened rose, but also, again, the broken stalk, because that symbolizes the life has stopped. More likely, though, more common would be the lily. And there are so many different types of lilies: calla lilies, Easter lilies, tiger lilies, lily of the valley. The one on the right is woodsman of the world. They put that at the base of their stones. Here are a few more examples. I do not know what kind of lily that is. It's like a folk art carving over in Boone County. Lily of the valley. And then water lilies. The first time I saw a water lily on a stone was in Huntsville, and the stone had been carved in Bentonville, and I thought the carver was playing a cruel trick on the family that ordered a lily on a stone, and he sends them a water lily. But later I read that, no, water lily is a death symbol. It's used by the Egyptians, Chinese, by Buddhists. The lotus opens and closes. So it sinks below the surface of the water in one version and rises to the surface. So it's death and life and rebirth. So water lilies do show up. You know, they're not extremely common, but they're out there. Now this one, I was in a cemetery. I have a friend named Tommy Mooney, and she and I go to graveyards together. And we were over in Logan County, and we saw this, and I said very knowledgeably, "Well, there's a water lily." And Tommy, who actually grows a garden, said to me, "No, that's a sunflower." And I said, "That's a water lily." And she said, "That's a sunflower." And I went home and looked it up. And I looked it up in Douglas Keister. This is called Stories in Stone. And I highly recommend it. It's got every symbol. It's also got 24 pages of abbreviations. So if you see initials on a stone, you can find what fraternal lodge that signifies. And Douglas Keister has flowers listed. And he says that the sunflower is extremely rare. I'm feeling smug. And then he says, except in Catholic cemeteries. And this is in St. Joseph's. Tommy was right. And I put this in, I always say Tommy was right because I owe her this. It represents devotion to the Catholic Church. And the reason is that when a sunflower is a young plant, it follows the sun, and that would be striving after God. But a mature plant stays fixed in one direction, and that would be the devout soul that has found God and is fixed in its beliefs. So it's the striving after God and the finding God. Now, because we're talking about Catholic cemeteries, I have to put this in because I've been in groups and everybody thinks it's a dollar sign. And I've even got a picture of my boyfriend holding a sheaf of dollar bills under one of these, and it shocks people, but it's not a dollar sign. It is actually three initials, IHS, or Iota Eta Sigma, and it stands for the first three letters of Jesus' name in the Greek alphabet. Now, sometimes you will read that it can also be an IHC, which is the first three letters in the Roman alphabet. The popular belief is that it stands for a phrase in Latin that means, "In this sign you will conquer," or "Jesus, Savior of men." But according to Douglas Keister, it is really, originally, it was the first three letters of Jesus' name. But whatever reason, when you see that, it will be a Catholic, on a Catholic grave. G is for the gates ajar. This stone seems pretty self-explanatory. Gates of heaven, standing open. Soul, there's the dove, got a little olive branch in its beak, flying over the gates, the soul entering heaven. What more is there to be said? Well, 3 years ago, I went to Association for Gravestone Studies annual meeting, and one of the board members gave a whole half-hour talk on the meaning of the gates ajar. And it was much more complicated than just this. What happened basically was that in 1868, a spiritualist novelist named Elizabeth Stuart Phelps Ward published a novel called The Gates Ajar. And in it, a woman is grieving a loss, and she's comforted by the knowledge, or by a friend telling her, that the person she loves is really still with her, that he hasn't gone to heaven, but he is still keeping tabs on her. Well, this, you imagine, 1868, every person in this country was in mourning. Fathers, sons, brothers, husbands, nephews, neighbors. The casualties from the Civil War meant that everybody was in mourning. And to have a novel that says, heaven is a welcoming place, but our loved ones can pass back and forth. The gates do not close behind them. This was a huge concept. The Gates Ajar became so popular, it began to be put on merchandise, women's clothing, funeral arrangements, boxes of matches. It became this symbol that everybody wanted on a tombstone. Elizabeth Phelps Ward went on to write Beyond the Gates and The Gates Between, so it was a trilogy. In it somewhere, she also posits that heaven is a really nice place, much like Earth, with fine carpeting and pianos. And people like that too, but mainly it was the idea that their loved ones still stayed with them and still kept an eye on what they were doing and still loved us and want to know how we're doing. This was such a huge blockbuster of a book that Mark Twain had to weigh in and write a parody, which was Captain Stormfield's Visit to Heaven. And the mail order companies began putting this on tombstones. Sears Roebuck started its own tombstone business in 1900. Montgomery Ward started in 1906. And not only were these stones shipped to Arkansas, but local carvers used the catalogs and started making their own versions. But people loved the old symbols. They didn't want to give them up. So they would order a Gates Ajar from a local carver, but then over the gate, they would have some other symbol put there, one of the older ones. This is just a few. Every symbol I've talked about today is over a gate somewhere. Maybe not a broken column. Well, I haven't found that yet, but I found lambs. I found, for example, up here, MWA, there's an axe floating over the gates. Well, that's Modern Woodsmen of America. That was a fraternal lodge. Here are the Odd Fellows. Here's God's hand, again, pointing downward. Here's a hand pointing upward. Here's God's hand holding a bouquet of what I think are lily of the valley. But all of these symbols, angels, tree stumps for woodsmen of the world, somewhere somebody ordered a Gates Ajar stone with a symbol of their choice. So Gates Ajar, mostly when you find them in Arkansas, they're going to be in the 1900s. If you find one that's got a much earlier date, it was probably put there much later. It was backdated. I'm not going to talk about hands. We already did that with the first slide, but just want to throw this in. These hands, and people think it's like the Star Wars gesture. This is found only in Jewish cemeteries. They are the KOHANIM hands, and they are on stones of direct male descendants of Aaron, the brother of Moses. So it's a priestly blessing. This is in Hot Springs. There are two of them in Jewish Rest. The only time I've ever seen them in Arkansas. They may exist elsewhere, but they're quite rare. But I wanted to explain that one. T is for torches, almost always shown upside down. If you were to take a torch and hold it upside down, the flame would go out, and that would be the life extinguished, and that would be death. But they always show them with a flame. So I'm not sure, really, if it's meant to say, well, yes, the torch is upside down, but the soul goes on. It's still burning. I've never found a torch without the flames. And they also tend to kind of hide. This one's down the side of a stone, really narrow. And this is on the doors of a, what's the word for it? A mausoleum. Thank you. Why did I lose that word? It's on the doors of a mausoleum in Carthage, Missouri. And W is for wheat. The wheat sheaf is not a child symbol. This is something for a fully lived life. You do not harvest wheat until it is fully ripe. So when the wheat is gathered, that is a life that has reached full-term fruition. Now this one here is on a family plot. It's a family plot marker, and it's got the sickle or the scythe, next to it. They're a little obscure. A lot of times they're on the tops of beveled stones, and they tend to get weathered, but they're out there, and so that would be another good mortality symbol. Well, that's a quick alphabet of the symbols that have stories behind them. I'm going to do just a quick thing on the fraternal lodges. fraternal lodges flourished at a time when there were no social services, before there was Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, anything like that. And if a man died, his widow and children were at the mercy of some other relative to take them in. There were no safety nets other than the poor farm, and nobody wanted to go there. So the one thing a man could do to safeguard this would be to join a lodge and pay his dues, be a member in good standing, and that would provide him with a type of life insurance. Sometimes they could actually buy a policy. Some of the lodges had as part of their creed that they would mark the grave, provide the tombstone. Some of them promised to take care of widows and orphans. The Odd Fellows established cemeteries as part of their creed. And a man could join as many lodges as he had money for the dues. What's funny is if you look in old newspapers, usually inside the front page there'll be a little index that'll say secret societies. And then we'll list who they are, what time they meet, and where. And you think, well, how secret is that? But really, anyone could join. They weren't, like I say, you could pay the dues. And you wanted to join as many as possible because they provided different types of benefits. So it's not uncommon to find an obituary that says, lists all these different lodges that oversaw the funeral and performed certain rites and did things. I don't know who the Ancient Order of Pyramids were. This is up in Carterville, Missouri, but I really like their symbol. This man is over in the Jewish section of Oakland in Little Rock, and he has a stone loaded with symbols. If you notice, first of all, of course, he's a Mason. There's the compass and square. But he's got two things. These are called plumb bob jigs, and they're different. I don't know why two. I don't know why they're different. But the plumb bob signified that the person was upright and true. Now, he's also got this crossed shovel and mallet. That's probably a trade union of some kind. They had the brotherhood of train operators, engineers, miners, etc. I don't know. There's no initials. But that's more likely a profession. And then down here, the Temple of Honor is the Odd Fellows. And he's got Hebrew and English. And for all I know, these stars have some significance. But anyway, this is a man who was a joiner, clearly. The most common of the lodges would be the Masons. They have so many symbols, I can't keep track of all of them. These are just a few. This would be the Shriners, of course. This is Eastern Star down here, the women's branch of the Masons. And I should say, too, that men could also insure their wives very often through their lodges. Not many did. And they never insured their children because children were cheap to bury. You didn't need an insurance policy. When you're seeing a lot of initials, again, Douglas Keister, a good place to look for what some of these stand for. You have to know where to start. This is Hiram, the widow's son, sent to King, I forget what the S stands for. Fatal, fairest among 10,000 altogether lovely, around the edges of the star. I guess you have to be a member of the Eastern Star to know what that means. But there's all kinds of initials, and this would be a degree of masonry. I think this one is too. Some of the other fraternal lodges, not quite popular, but not quite as widespread as the Masons. Ancient Order of United Workmen. Look, there's our anchor again. The eye, the all-seeing eye, and the three links of chain tends to be Odd Fellows, but Masons used it too. Royal Neighbors of America have endurance, modesty, faith, unselfishness, courage around the edge. Cross and crown, I think, in the middle. The Elks. The Odd Fellows on the right, when they use the links of chain, FLT, friendship, love, and truth. Daughters of Rebecca on the left. And that, by the way, is a daughter of Rebecca, dove flying over the gates ajar, and then flying through the crescent moon. That's a flag holder. Some of the more obscure lodges, Fraternal Order of Eagles, not a lot of them around here. And I don't know down here what these initials stand for. Knights of Pythias, with the raven on top of the helmet. And then the Improved Order of Red Men, and TOTE, Totem of the Eagle. The Red Men had an active lodge in Eureka Springs. There are a couple photographs of them all in war bonnets in a parade. This one was taken over near in Franklin County near Ozark. Still more obscure, Knights of Honor, Ladies of the Maccabees with a beehive. LOTM, Ladies of the Maccabees. Here's one of the brotherhoods, again, pickaxe. I think that might be miners. Farmers Educational and Cooperative Union of America. I've only found that one time. And the Knights of Honor, all these interlocked letters. African American lodges. There were black lodges for the Masons and the Odd Fellows, and I believe the Woodsmen of the World. But then there were also ones founded by African Americans, and these were a very big deal, and pretty much all of them died out right around the Depression. People stopped having money to pay dues, and what were huge organizations, with pretty much the exception of, say, the Masons, many of them are now defunct. The Sisters of the Mysterious Tens on the left, Mosaic Templars, United Brothers of Friendship. By the way, these two are in Oak Cemetery here over in Fayetteville, near the National Cemetery. Mosaic Templars has a really nice symbol. It's a snake biting its own tail, symbol of immortality. It's a endless circle, and the 3 V's. The first African-American Masonic Lodge in Arkansas was founded in 1869, by the way. I'm sorry about the picture on the left. I took that, and it's just terrible, but I tried to show you down here. The International Order of 12 Knights and Daughters of Tabor, an anti-slavery society, reorganized 1872 in Missouri. And apparently when you have the 3s over the 7s, the 3 over the 7 is the women's temple, and the 7 over the 3 is the men's. So if you can't read a person's name and you're looking for a stone, it might help you do that. The Royal Circle of Friends on the right, founded in 1909 in Arkansas, and there's the 09 in the middle of the triangle. Again, some of these lodges provided the tombstone. So when a person died, they would make it and bring it in. Probably, if you go into any cemetery and just scan the ground, the thing that's going to jump out at you most will be the tree trunks. I mean, for just in terms of an unusual symbol that you're going to see a lot of. The tree trunks are not necessarily Woodsmen of the World unless you find their emblem. Lots of people like tree trunks, again, as the life cut down. But Woodsmen of the World, when they started, would let local carvers use their own imagination when creating the tree trunks. As a result, some of the early ones have things in them, like there's a dove at the top, coils of rope. I've seen one with a chipmunk, and then one with like a potted plant carved to one side. Over time, they got more and more streamlined. Woodsmen of the World was established by Joseph Cullen Root in 1890. He was already a Mason, an Odd Fellow, and a Knight of Pythias, but he just couldn't stop joining things. Well, actually, he wanted to start selling life insurance. So he founded this organization, and in the beginning, he really hedged his bets. He only allowed these lodges to be founded in states that had the healthiest populations, only for men between certain ages, and they could not be in a dangerous profession, so you couldn't be a coal miner, for example. But over time, he relaxed these rules and he allowed everybody in. One of the tenets of this organization was mark every grave, and by golly, they did. They didn't just mark them, they would go back and decorate them once a year. A lot of times it will give you the name of the lodge on the stone. They had a very complicated emblem in the beginning. The dove with something in its beak, the axe, the splitting maul, the log, there's the wedge. But over time, again, things got streamlined, got simpler and simpler. They are still in business, by the way, and they sell insurance. I don't think they have a death benefit any longer. I don't think they provide a stone, but you can still put their emblem on your stone. These are just some of the variations of the Woodsmen of the World emblem. There were offshoots. I would use the word splinter groups. Modern Woodsmen of America, Woodsman's Circle, Neighbors of Woodcraft, Royal Neighbors, Supreme Forest, Woodman's Circle, and Modern Woodsmen of the World. All different versions of this. And they all tended to use the crossed axes and splitting mauls as part of their emblem. And they changed their emblems over time. They also changed the basic shape of the stone. Eureka Springs is a good example. They have I think the groundskeepers lost count of how many different versions of the Woodsman of the World stone there is, because you could have stacked logs, halved logs, pretty much anything. It doesn't have to have a log in it either. But not all tree trunks are Woodsman stones. This is a really good example. This is over in Clifty in Madison County for Cherubia and Benjamin Vaughn. Benjamin Vaughn was a Mason, and his wife was a member of the Eastern Star. This is not a Woodsman stone, but it is two very long lives, very illustrious lives, that ended in death. And their children and grandchildren, who put this along, this erected in memory of our parents and grandparents, is along that connecting branch, paid to have this stone put in the cemetery. Cherubia already had a tombstone, but I suppose when Benjamin died, they put this one up. So not all tree trunks are Woodsman. And if you find a tree trunk for a child, It's, again, people didn't insure their children. I would love to find a child's grave that had a woodsman emblem on it, but I don't think that's possible. Now, when you find the tree trunk, these happen to be in the shape of crosses, probably not coincidentally. There's a little cross on that one. But again, it's a life cut short, and so it's appropriate for a child. This one has a little dove with a broken wing, and this would be a lamb. And that brings us to the end. I should say there's my email address. If anybody has a picture, or they want to send me, or a question, or want to tell me about a really great stone you found, please let me know.
This podcast was produced by the Shiloh Museum of Ozark History. We welcome your comments. You can email us at Shiloh, that's SHILOH, at springdalear.gov. If you'd like more information about our podcast series or about the museum in general, you can visit our website at shilohmuseum.org.